This is the Cricket Matters podcast. If you're new to the show, it's great to have you here. Please make sure to subscribe and review. That way we can reach more and more people and spread the word far and wide and grow the Cricket Matters audience, as this is only episode 2, so we need to really get the word out there all about the Cricket Matters podcast. With me, as always, is my co-host James Breeze. James, how are you doing?
Good, thanks. How are you? Gearing up for pre-season cricket at Cardiff, actually. So it's
Exactly.
a very timely, apt episode.
Timely and topical. So we're going to shoot straight in. No banter, no chat. Let's just get straight into the meat of it, because I know that's what you all want. We're talking pre-season fitness advice. As you say, you're just gearing up for pre-season at Cardiff. What do you usually... Let's talk about what you usually see, and then we can talk about what we might want to do differently, James.
Well, what I usually see, and I already started seeing around all the Instagrams and TikToks and everything, it's now January. Everyone wants to get back into the nets, ready to start the season coming in April, May. And what they basically do is they just jump into nets and start batting and bowling. And if they're lucky, they may do a couple of fielding drills in between, depending on where they are, unless they're at a professional level where they are working on more specific drills. But in the amateur game, they want to get back in. They're excited to play again. They're excited to get going again. And they just end up...
They want to do the fun stuff. Everyone wants to do the fun... That's the fun stuff, right?
Exactly. Everyone wants to bat. Everyone wants to bowl. But it's this time of year where the enthusiasm tied in with the January fitness madness can get the best of people. Because I've seen it time and time again. People are waiting for cricket season and pre-season to start. And on their first session, what happens? Hammy goes, quad goes, calf goes, shoulder is hanging on by a bit of sticky tape anyway. And that kind of falls off as well, and it just makes it even worse. And they fall into this perpetual cycle of training, injured, and it disrupts their whole cricket season. Yeah. So hopefully today, I'm going to share a little bit what we're potentially doing at Cardiff behind the scenes, starting up the season, and also something to think about for your own fitness and health and well-being to help improve your longevity over the course of the season. To keep you performing better for longer, because that's what it's all about. It's not just about spoiling your fun, taking away from the good stuff.
Absolutely not. No,
just bowling and batting and hitting, whacking the ball all over the place and trying those reverse sweep shots and whatever you want to do. It's more of a case of look, how do we make this better? How do we improve that and help you make it better? But keeping you safe for long, because there's a huge injury factor we've got to think about when it comes to cricket. We pull up the stats.
Well, like you said, hamstrings, lower back, quads.
Yeah, it was like 50% of all injuries, apparently, according to the study, was all lower limb, quads and hammies being the most of it, with the next predominant being lower back issues. And again, there's a little bit more tying to shoulders. It's what I see anyway. It's shoulders, back,
but
hammies, quads,
as we were discussing off air, it's not a surprise. Because obviously cricket is played over, unless you're doing 2020 or 1 day, cricket is played over 5 days, potentially. And so you've got to be able to recover it well from each day. And you've also, goes from potentially a lot of standing still to suddenly explosive, to stand still to suddenly explosive. So it's not surprising to see the type of injuries are hamstrings and quads and lower back and stuff like that, is it?
It's the same in pre-season as well. So again, I think, using most club cricketers as an example, they go to nets, they're standing around talking with their mates, having a bit of banter, and suddenly they have a little bit of a bowl. And then they'll,
or a little bit of a bat.
A little bit of a bat. It is how it goes a little bit. So they go from 0 to 60, particularly fast bowling and even spin bowling. Spin bowling is a lot more explosive and aggressive than most people realise. It's the powers and forces you put on your body. So you're going from a standstill, gradually building up to this explosion at the crease to put through, and it puts your body under so much stress, and the forces going through it are incredible. I think.
Well, exactly. Typically for bowlers, fast bowlers, the forces going through the ankles, knees, hips are huge.
8 times body weight.
Yeah.
From what I remember, we haven't got the study in front of us, but if you're talking sprinters, when they sprint the top of their game, it's 5 times body weight. Joggers about 3 times body weight, but cricketers, that front leg has about 8 times force going through it. So the forces through ankles, hips, knees, we've got to protect it. Then carries into the lower back, and we'll talk about injuries and things to think about later down the line in other podcasts. But so what I'm trying to say is, for pre-season for cricketers, there's a couple of things we need to do. There's 2 elements to this. First of all, we need to assess to see where you're at right now. What is your priority lying ahead of you for the season coming up and through your practice? And secondly, it's it's what to do in warm-ups and cool downs during your practice sessions. I think that is it's not the sexiest thing to do. It's not the you consider most important, but for pre-season, I'd argue it really is.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about some of the assessments to help you figure out what you need to do during your warm-ups, because it needs to be more tailored to you as well, and how you want to try and move it forwards.
Yeah, more targeted and specific, because we want you doing the fun stuff. We want you doing the batting, the bowling, the catching, but we want to get you there safely. So Absolutely. As you said, what's the starting point? It's assessments. Assessments come first. So let's start with health. Talk us through some of the health assessments that we like to look at.
Exactly. So for those who haven't come across our system before, we think in 4 quadrants: health, movement, strength, and cardio. Health may not be the sexy thing, but it's a big precursor for cricketing performance, I think, long term.
Well, if you haven't got your health, you've got nothing.
Exactly. Exactly. So, there's a whole load more of assessments and data we go in person when we do it with people in house. However, the 3 things I want to look at before pre-season are your resting heart rate, which you can take first thing in the morning, or look at your average resting heart rate on your smartwatch. I got an Apple Watch, for example. You can look at what your average resting heart rate is here. Then I'm looking at your weight, essentially, comparing it to your height. And there's a formula we do this. I'm not so interested in... Well, I am interested in body fat. It's a huge component of it. But if you haven't got scales to weigh yourself, this gives you a better idea of where you're sitting in terms of performance at the highest levels. So, starting health, resting heart rate. If you have a resting heart rate of over 60, then you are, I'd say... not just a risk of heart issues long term, but potentially your cardiovascular fitness is not as good as it should be.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, there are medical conditions that can mean you have a high resting heart rate. However, don't use that as an excuse to say you don't do it. So that's the first thing. I'm looking for basic health. What's their resting heart rate? And then I'm looking for their weight compared to their height. Now, if you look at professional football players, there's a formula that I use, and it's weight. Your height in centimetres minus 100, which gives you roughly your ideal weight you should be to perform at. Now, professional footballers are more -5 in that sort of line. Now, I haven't found the data on cricket players, but I like to compare cricketers to their wiry frames, the power to weight ratio, the speed at what they've got to move at, similar to football players. So totally. I'd like to see something similar here. So if you're looking at an ideal elite professional performance weight, you're looking for men, height in centimetres minus 100, minus 5 kilos, but around the 100 mark here. So, for example, I'm 173 centimetres.
Towards the -5. That's what we want to be looking at.
Exactly. I'm 173 centimetres. I wish I was 2 meters 10, but I'm not. 173 centimetres, and then minus 173 kilos, which is bang on where I am at the moment. So I'm not in a performance area. I'm a kind of maintenance health. It's post-Christmas. You know, ideally for me, I know I need to lose a couple of kilos, and that's why I know I'm fighting fit and good to perform and move better. I run better. All these different things. So for women, by the way, it's 100. Your height in centimetres minus 110. It's a similar sort of format. But don't get too caught up. You know, that's what we're looking for. If you're out of these scopes, then straight away, resting heart rate means cardiovascular fitness and health is important and paramount. But secondly, you're looking at maybe weight loss is the best and biggest thing you need to do in terms of pre-season fitness, because again, high percentage of body fat is a high indicator for injury long term. And it's also going to reduce your performance in running, batting, fielding, recovering, all these different things.
Recovery, all of that. All of that.
And it's a big part of it, of what we're trying to do. It's not just how fast you bowl once, it's how you do it repeatedly over again. It's the same with sprinting between the wickets. It's not how many singles you run, it's how many you do it time and time again. It's how many threes you can add into it and then recover ready for the next ball. So there's lots of things you've got to think about here. So weight is a very important marker, and I'd say look at this as a very simple snapshot to see where you're at. And if you're outside those markers, then sadly weight loss is on your horizon.
Probably your priority. Yep.
Exactly. So that's a starting point.
And just talking about, actually, before we move on, James, just talking about recovery, we'll talk about this more in depth on next podcasts in the future, I'm sure. But we are all about improving that recovery, because if you recover better between your singles, your doubles, triples, whatever it is you're running between the wickets. You can make better decisions, right?
Absolutely, that's it.
So you're gonna bat better, you're gonna bowl better, etc., etc.
Yeah, I see that more in the amateur game than ever before. And we'll talk about the cardio side of things in a second too. But in fact, we'll talk more about it during the cardio section. But yeah, no, absolutely, that's it. It's all
Cool.
about
So that's your health. Now we're moving on to movement. Probably in the amateur game, probably not a massive consideration, but really, really important.
Yeah, indeed. I'd say, now again, there's lots of movement screens and tests we do behind the scenes, but two that will make sense to you because it's a podcast and you'll understand here is we're looking at what we call the shoulder test. It's called the Ackley test. It's like, can you touch your fingertips behind you on both sides? So you take one hand, airplane your hands out wide and try and reach one over the top, one underneath, and try and touch your fingertips behind you and do it on both sides. If you can't do that, I would highly suggest you have shoulder issues, which is kind of common in the cricketing game, particularly if you're a bowler, a bowler and fielding as well, throwing it in. You always have one side stiffer than the other. If you struggle, we've got to be careful, particularly if there's an asymmetry, as we call it, from left to right. If you can do it on one side, not the other, it's a high prediction of potential injury moving forwards too. So that's something you've got to think about. Protect those shoulders at all costs. If you have asymmetries or you can't do it, you know you have shoulder mobility issues, and that could be a mixture of soft tissue work that needs done, some massage, but also some just reprogramming of the brain to teach your shoulder how to move in that plane of motion here. So that's the first thing you can do. Touch your fingertips behind you. And the second one is a deep squat sit test. I can't tell you how many times I've seen cricketers load heavy barbells on their back and not be able to do this. But if you don't own squatting, you are going to struggle in any form of performance. And having a strong, mobile lower part of the body where you own this movement is so vital for cricket to power off and generate power from. So if you can't sit in what we call a deep squat sit for at least 5 minutes, ideally more like 10 minutes comfortably, then we have issues elsewhere, which potentially means ankles, hips, thoracic spine, which is the middle part of your back. And if you have problems there, it's going to put you at high risk of lower back pain too, and putting major issues on it.
Especially if you're a wicket keeper, would you say?
Yeah, definitely a wicket keeper, because that position they're sitting in for a long period of time is going to cause issues. And I know lots of wicket keepers with lots of back pain. Lots of back pain. So yeah, those are two things you can try at home, and more often than not, people will say, no, I can't do either. That is where you start to realise, okay, this is my pre-season focus, is to get me moving better in these two patterns.
Yep, absolutely. And then from there, a couple of basic strength tests to consider.
Yeah, exactly. Again, things you can do at home, no equipment. Again, you could go more specific if you want to go into the gym, but just two things you can do at home. Can you hang from a bar for 60 seconds? It's a simple yes or no. If it's a no, both male and female, by the way, it means you have grip issues. And if you have grip issues, you potentially have core issues, and you also have shoulder issues.
I was going to say potential. It's down to shoulders again as well.
Exactly.
Isn't it?
It is such an important element. And if you want to get stronger, if you haven't got strong grip, if you haven't got strong abs, and you haven't got strong glutes, you're always going to struggle. And guess what? The power to bowl comes from all those areas. It comes from the same from batting as well. So like, you know, in trying to hit the ball at the ground, it comes from strong, powerful glutes, hips, drive, rotation, power, all these things. So hanging from the bar is such an important thing. But again, most people struggle. Now, to caveat that, talk about the core, can you hold a plank for 2 minutes? If you can't hold a plank for 2 minutes, Stuart McGill, who's a very famous professor in back pain, says you haven't got the basic muscular endurance, so you're always going to struggle with lower back pain. So these are your starting points in terms of strength. If you struggle with these, that's what we need to move forward and make sure you've nailed down before we start doing more advanced testing and getting here. So again, in fitness realms, we're talking about health, movement, strength. These are places you've got to have nailed down before we go into the nets, really. Or if not, start working on as you're building up towards the season.
Yeah, work on it in conjunction, because we don't want to keep you from the nets. Let's say in conjunction, we want you to do the fun stuff.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Still going to go in the nets. No one's ever, I've seen people going to nets with like broken shoulders and like fingers and like whatever. They're hobbling on one leg and they're still bowling like how they're trying to do it. And then it comes to our final assessment, which is, I think, is a good one. Again, it's a bit more advanced. So for any younger cricketers out there or some of the older guys, running is a big part of cricket. Like sprinting's a big part of it, in between the wickets, running to fielding. but it's a long game, and you've got to be able to be fit enough to handle the whole day thing. So a simple cardio test we look at, well, there's two actually, depending on which levels and how advanced people are. So it's a 5K run, and we're looking in terms of that. So when it comes to a 5K run, can men run it in under 31 minutes? It's not elite, but it's basic fitness. It's basic fitness standards. If you can do that, you're in a good position to start your season and progress from there. Women, it's under 36 minutes. But again, if you know you can't hit those markers, then we're going to struggle in the season. And you've got to be able to run in cricket. Like, I'm not saying you have to run marathons to get fit for cricket. That's not the game. But you've got to have the endurance of a marathoner to be able to do all the sprints and covers in between. So a 5K run, which is kind of like taken from the same test the Navy SEALs put people through, we've seen over the years, it's an important marker to how we do it. So that's the first starting thing. Now, in an ideal world, I'd love to see people doing a 10K run before we start doing any 2K time trials like the England cricket team start doing. And again, that's more elite numbers, and we're looking for men sub 48 minutes and women sub 55. That's a high performance level we're trying to get towards to think about here. But it's a big thing. Cardio is a big part of cricket because, as you said, it comes back to making better decisions. I know the fitter I am, the quicker I recover in between twos and threes, and the quicker I can focus and concentrate on the next ball. And when you're batting, it's all about the next ball. For me as a batsman, and number three, you've got to concentrate and think harder. Yeah. And you've got to
concentrate for a whole day, potentially day after day. So your aerobic capacity, aerobic base is a huge thing. So you can't neglect that, can you?
No, exactly. So it's a big thing here. So those are the assessments we're looking at when we're starting to develop cricketers before pre-season. If you're out of any of those, well, there's some starting points for you to go and help with and start working with outside of the skill-based practice that we're trying to do. Now, before we go into like the warm-ups and cool-downs and thinking about that, what you can try and do is work out how many times you go in the nets. Usually pre-season for most amateurs, it's two, if you're lucky, maybe once at least a week to go into here. But if you want to start doing things properly, then you can add 2 to 3 strength training sessions, 2 to 3 cardio sessions a week, and that's going to build up throughout your work to go in conjunction with the fitness stuff you're doing as well for here. So that's a bit of a pre-season training advice to think in terms of when to go to the gym, when to go and do some cardio alongside the skill-based stuff that you're doing too.
Okay, so let's talk about then what do we do in warm-ups and cool-downs before we're going to get into the nets.
Great questions.
Be a little bit more specific.
Yeah, no, exactly. So again, it's always got to be specific to the person indeed involved. You've also got to think about cricketers as a group, what we're going to focus on, the main areas. It's got to be hamstrings, hips, quads, calves, I've said hips, T-spine, and shoulders. You've got to think about that in those terms here. We've got to address them before we start season. Now, again, I'll give an example. I was talking to Ali, the coach at Cardiff, who will get on the podcast actually to interview because he works with lots of young kids. He's an ECB level 4 coach. So I want to, with Ali, for example, here at Cardiff, we're going to spend half an hour doing some mobility and warm-up drills and some bodyweight stuff to prep the guys leading into the net session. So we're going to have half hour of that stuff leading into an hour and a half of skill-based stuff and then going into nets maybe at the end.
So can I just interject, what do they do at the moment then, if they don't do that?
Well, it depends. Again, it's at the moment...
It might be a hard question to answer, but
it is.
Give it a go.
Every club is different. It's a very wide, sweeping statement here. But I'll give an example. I was working with Wales over 50 guys on the weekend, and they're doing a lot of static stretching at the start. Now, static stretching should always be done at the end, as an example. Yep. You've got to start with dynamic mobility first. And it was educating those guys. That's why you see a lot of people's basic stretches, touch toes, away we go. We've done a bit of a warm up, or we do a couple of roll a ball in the net, or throwing a ball between a goal, a hockey, like roller football, whatever it is. Play football sometimes. It's a warm ups. All these things to get the heart rate up, which we're kind of taught to do. However, what we in an ideal world, we want to activate the muscles. We want to release the muscles. We want to mobilise the joints before we go into those sorts of things. Again, people roll over ankles, pull hammies, and we warm-ups of football. Well, I say they go into football too soon. It's fun and it's engaging. I love it for a game, a bit of competition, a bit of football, or a bit of rollerball. But I do the mobility, dynamic stuff first before we go into that stuff. That's the big thing I'd change here. So we've got to focus on this. So, like in an ideal world, this is ideal world. Not everyone's going to have it. You'd have a foam roller or a lacrosse ball or something like a mobility ball to release the tissue, because you can't make changes until you release the tight tissue with trigger points in it.
Yep.
So you got to release a little bit of the muscle around there. Then you're like mobilizing those joints dynamically, taking through a full range of motion. And then you activate the muscles around it to support them. So again, that's what we try to do in Cardiff. And coming up this week, we'll be literally taking them in, we'll be mobilising the joints, getting them warm, activating the muscles, particularly the core. The core is the centre pillar point for everything that you do, is switching that on. Because sometimes, the core is not working the way it should be. So therefore, the hamstrings and adductors in your legs switch on, same with the calves, and they go pop when they can't take the strain anymore because the abs aren't doing the work they should be.
Yeah, basically they're compensating. It's like, why have I got constantly tight hamstrings or adductors? Well, it's possibly, we can't say it definitely, but possibly because they're compensating for a lack of core strength and stability.
Exactly, and the way the brain has forgotten how to pattern and sequence these things all together.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to try and talk about. So again, ideally, in an ideal world, you come up, you'll do a bit of foam rolling. I'm not talking like hours and hours of foam rolling, just a couple of minutes, specific on key areas such as your shoulders and your hips. Inside those areas and those quads, those areas and hammies, just those there. Just get in for a couple of minutes on, as much as you can, 30 seconds in each, whatever it is. Just get in there and just get some feeling into those areas, and then we start mobilising those joints. That dynamically, that's the key thing to that.
Absolutely.
And then you go into the activation work. Again, we talk about core work. Simplest one to describe here on the podcast is I'd get them crawling with their knees off the ground. It looks stupid, but it's a great way of improving shoulder stability.
Great core activation, great coordination as well.
Exactly, and gait pattern to help you get moving in here. So switching everything on as the way it should be. So that's a great way. Dead bugs, bird dogs, all these little things you can do. If you're not sure what they are, just Google them, or go into YouTube, you'll see loads of video examples there. So that's how we do it. And then we do the passive stretching right at the end. Now, again, I totally get it. Like, if you've won a game or you've lost, the last thing you want to do is think about cooling down.
You want to go to the pub and have a beer, right?
Exactly. Or buy a jug if you scored a ton or whatever you want to do. Yeah. But what you've got to do in pre-season is you've got to focus on that stretching, because you haven't played for a good few months. You're at high risk of developing injury and going too hard, too fast, too soon. So and also onset muscle soreness. You're going to be stiff and you're going to be sore from your first net session. There's no getting away from it because it's brutal. You can't.
We know this from. Sorry, James, go on.
No, I say you can't get away from it. The first net session,
you can't.
Is brutal. So,
and we know this from clients all the time. It's like, I skipped the cool down. I didn't know. I'm feeling a bit stiff today. What did you do? Your cool down yesterday? No, I didn't. I skipped it. We hear that all the time, and it's it's just as important as the warm up. You got to stretch off at the end. Do you want to get into like time specifics or anything like that?
Look, again, it all depends how much time. It's going to be time specific for the individual. I've written a blog actually on the Cricket Matters website detailing more in depth about timings and how long you should be training for and warming up for and activating for. But again, it's whatever you got to work with. In an ideal world, 5 minutes, is realistic. 10 minutes, 15 minutes, the older you are. Me as an aging cricketer, 40 plus now, like I've got to spend 10, 15 minutes just getting to move, and ideally 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the game stretching out. Do I stretch at the end of the game all the time? No, because it just isn't. You got to pack stuff away. Amateur cricketers, you got to pack stuff away. Senior player in the team now, got to make sure shit gets done. But it's it's how you try and focus it, but always try and mirror the things that you're going to work off in the cool down. So active dynamic hip stuff, hamstring stuff at the start, and then do passive stuff towards the end. Or if you're feeling niggles towards the end, you can maybe get that lacrosse ball. I always say cricketers pack like a lacrosse ball or something to get in at the end of the game as well, and release those things before you get to the showers, whatever it is, because it's going to make a massive difference to your recovery. Because if you're playing 2 games in the weekend, you're going to feel better on the Sunday after that. Yeah.
And what I would say, if you have only got a few minutes, then do one stretch well rather than several poorly. So pick one stretch that you might specifically need for yourself, whether that's the shoulders or a quad hamstring, whatever it is, and do that stretch for a couple of minutes. As we know and as we can share with our new listeners, you generally need to hold a stretch for about 2 minutes per side if it's a single-sided stretch to get any change in that tissue. There's no point doing 20, 30 seconds. It's just not going to work. So if you don't have a lot of time, pick one specific stretch and do that one stretch well.
Absolutely. And again, talking about those guys, before you go into the rolling drill, the fielding drills at the start of the game, do the mobility, dynamic stuff first, activations, whatever you can before you get into those drills. You'll see, the game will be more fun because there'll be more warm up and dynamically can move better. But 2, you're reducing the likelihood of injury during those games, which you want to do. Because I know there's a lot of debate in the cricketing world. Should he ban football from warm ups? Should he do all these things? They're fun. They're engaging.
Well, there have been quite a lot of cricketers, including England cricketers, injured playing football during warm-ups, haven't there, over the years?
Yeah, exactly. The famous one was Glenn McGrath went on his ankle, I think. There's loads of them examples here, but just think about it here. But that's how you do it. So in terms of pre-season advice, know where you're at. Get some basic assessments to see what you need to be doing on. Again, we're not talking about skill-based assessments. If you've got certain skills in your batting or your bowling got to work on, that's separate. We'll maybe we'll try and get some guests and some high-level coaching to talk about that at another date. But in terms of fitness, where's your starting point? Focus on that. Reduce the risk of injury, because cricket's a hard sport on the body, and that's what we're trying to help educate you guys through and get through the season and help you get ready for the first game of the season where you can score that ton, take that fifer, and take that screamer of a catch on the boundary.
Absolutely. I hope you guys have found this useful. Thank you very much for listening in. James, if they want to find out more about us or indeed download the High Performance Handbook for Cricketers, where do they go?
Just go to cricketmatters.com. There's loads of blogs. The YouTube channel will be up and running very soon too, so we'll have some videos here to put everything into context and how you can do some strength training stuff in between, and some of these mobility drills actually, because they don't come across well on podcasts. So we'll definitely do some for you guys in there. But cricketmatters.com, get your copy of the High Performance Handbook for Cricketers. It's the ultimate guide for cricketers who want to train smarter and perform better. It's our system of training. It's yours for free.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, James. Guys, if you enjoyed the podcast, please do share it far and wide with your cricketing friends. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.